Hey everyone, so many familiar faces. Andy, nice to see you. Got Callum and Stan and Michael and Erica, Sue, Jessica. All our friends are here. If you want to throw in the chat where you're joining us from and introduce yourself, that's great. You can do that. Brittany, I'll get your help just keeping an eye on that waiting room. I think you're able to admit people. Yeah,
Yep.
okay, great.
Yeah, you got it.
There's Neil, Brian. Great. So we're just going to give folks a couple minutes to sign in. I know it's the lunch hour. Hi, Margot. And I have hit record on the meeting. I think most of you will have got a notification about that, but you're able to turn your cameras off if you prefer not to be recorded on camera. But whatever you're comfortable with. Got folks from, let's take a look at the chat here. Wizard Lake. Colin. Hi, Colin. Good to hear from you. Elsa, Wabaman, Sturgeon Lake up north. We'll be at Sturgeon Lake this summer, Margot, so we'll have to touch base about that. Jessica, thanks for joining us from DataStream, our favorite data portal. Edmonton and Area Land Trust is here as well. That's great. Okay, we'll just give it 2 minutes before we jump into today's topic. Walt from Maya 10. Bonnie and Joy. Yeah, haven't seen you guys in a while. I think we missed you at our last conference. We need to get you out this year. Okay, great. It looks like people are filtering in, but we'll just let them in and we'll just go ahead and get started. I know a couple folks also have emailed me and asked if there would be a recording after this because not everyone is able to make it. And yeah, we've got the recording started now. So again, if you are not comfortable with the recording, feel free to just mute yourself or turn your cameras off. But we'll make this available on our Community of Practice webpage after the event. So welcome everyone. We've got a 4-part series this winter discussing all aspects of lake stewardship. And this is the second in that series, supported by the Land Stewardship Center of Canada. So thanks to those folks for a little bit of funding, which allows us to provide an honorarium to our stewardship group partners for their time presenting at these sessions. So if you don't know me, my name's Brad. I'm the executive director here at the Alberta Lake Management Society, and I'm helping to facilitate today's session. We also have Brittany Onesic and Kirsten Latender in the room with us, and they'll be helping to monitor the chat, monitor the waiting room, and then if we have time for some breakout sessions, they'll help navigate us through those as well. Thanks, Brittany and Kirsten. Still have a few folks filtering in, that's great. So a pretty simple agenda today. We'll start with our welcome and then jump to our presenter, David Trew, around 12:15. And we'll give Dave as much time as he needs to explore this topic, There will be time at the end of Dave's presentation for some discussion. So either just hold your questions until Dave's finished his presentation, or you can pop them in the chat as you think of them, and then we can read them out after Dave's. If there's time, like I said, we will go to some breakout discussions and just finish around 20 after 1 or 1:30 with some wrap up and some advertising for what's coming next month. March 5th is our next one. So if you haven't been to a Lake Stewardship Community Practice meeting before, the goal is to give our Lake Stewardship partners a chance to talk to each other, to share ideas, to learn from each other, to meet each other. And so we're hoping that the series we've got planned this year helps to achieve that. We've had some really great presentations in the past. Last winter was a whole series on lake recreation issues. We talked about wake boats, we talked about noise pollution, we talked about carrying capacity on lakes. So all of those are available on our website if you want to check out any of those topics. I have to admit, I failed to hit record last month, so I don't have a recording from last month, which is a shame because there was excellent information presented by 3 of our Lake Stewardship partners, Bernie, Norval, and Gavin from Lake Island, Lac St. Anne, Gull Lake, and Jackfish Lake. All of them were sharing their experiences with recent drought conditions on lakes and what sort of solutions those groups have been looking at to remediate low water levels. I was really impressed by all the effort and work that people have put into that issue at their lakes. So if you have any questions about that or want some follow-up on that, feel free to email me and I can touch base with you. We did send out a couple of resources following last week's webinar, so you all should have received that. And if you did sign up for today or last webinar, I think that means you are signed up for the whole series. So if you want to continue participating in the 2 webinars we have in March, just feel free to use that same Zoom link that you've been using so far. So today's topic is a little bit different from last week. We are talking about some of the history of lake management in Alberta and where it might be going. And for that topic, we approached David Trew, who has an impressive resume. I think we would be hard pressed to find someone who has such in-depth experience in all aspects of the Water for Life partnership. We have, a previous limnologist, an executive director of a WPAC, a director of a watershed stewardship group. So Dave brings all the perspectives. And for today's presentation, Dave is not necessarily representing any one of these groups. These are his own individual perspectives on the issue. But we will invite Walt Nielsen from Ayaton Lake Management Association to give us a couple of thoughts following Dave's presentation. So an extreme wealth of knowledge that Dave has, and I think it's important to share that with everyone. Following the presentation, if we have time, we'll go into some breakout discussions and dive deeper into the presentation today. But following Dave's presentation, if the discussion as a group is just really good, we can just keep doing that. So we'll be flexible and adaptable with how we approach today's webinar. Here also you can see Dave with Walt Nielsen accepting the Alberta Lake Management Society Volunteer of the Year Award for their efforts developing the Lakes of the Carvel Pitted Delta project. That's not a focus of Dave's presentation today, but I encourage you to check out that project on our website because Dave developed a program that has now looked at almost 80 lakes in the Carvel Pitted Delta near Spruce Grove and Stony Plain. And there are some impressively high quality water bodies out there. And this project has also led to a couple papers published in the primary literature. So an incredible project, which I would be remiss not to mention today. But again, that's not going to be a focus of Dave's presentation. So again, if you have questions, just hang on to them till the end or pop them in the chat. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dave. I'll stop sharing my slides, and then Dave, when you're ready for me to start your presentation, just let me know and I'll pop it up there.
Sure.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, thanks for the very kind introduction, Brad, and hello, everybody. I think I've met a good number of you over the years. Today I want to speak about the long-term challenge of lake and lake watershed management in Alberta, because I think we're at a bit of a pivotal point. I hate to use that word pivot, but it really is. We've been fortunate to have been able to gather a lot of information on Alberta lakes over the last 50 years, but I think we should think clearly about the next 50 years and how we're going to advance the cause of lake management, lake protection. So I'll talk a little bit about my background very briefly, and then how this topic came up this year, which is interesting. So I was born in Port Hope, Ontario. I grew up as a very keen angler, keen fisherman on the Ganaraska River, which flows through town. And I spent a lot of my adolescent time learning about fishing and reading fishing magazines. And so then I went off to university, to the University of Guelph, and I continued my interest in water and water sciences and fisheries there. So I had a really good exposure to limnology and oceanography and fisheries. It was fun. During the summers, I was fortunate to get work with what was called the Canada Land Inventory. And it was a national program all across the country where the provinces and the feds were cooperating. And the specific thing I worked on was sport fish capability surveys, which meant we went to a large number of lakes during the summer and assessed them in terms of their fish communities, their basic limnology, and worked with the regional biologists to assess their sport fish capability. Why do that in Ontario? Because there's 250,000 lakes down there, and they didn't have much information on a lot of them. So we were literally flown into the bush for 10 days at a time and dropped off. And it was quite an exciting concept to take two 20-year-old guys and throw them in the bush for 10 days without any outside communication. But anyways, we made it work. We had fun. After I finished at Guelph, I went over to Scotland. I was fortunate to get a job at the University of Strathclyde. And it was, my professor was involved in oceanographic research, and we did all our work up at Oban on the west coast of Scotland. There was a place there called the Scottish Marine Biological Association. And so I learned a tremendous amount at the university and at the lab at Oban, because all the field work was done off the west coast. So it was a huge, huge learning curve for me, and it kind of built on the practical work of my summers with the Canada Land Inventory program. So back to Canada in '74, and in Port Hope for about 6 months, and then I applied for a job with Fish and Wildlife out here in Edmonton and got it. So I came out and started work as the fisheries administrative biologist to be the right-hand man for Dr. Martin Pates. So that was another huge learning phase. I spent a couple of years with Martin, and it was my introduction to the fisheries of Alberta, but also all the lakes and all the rivers that were being managed for fisheries or had been assessed. The Canada Land Inventory program happened out here too. So there were a lot of coincidences, and it was a really tremendous couple of years. The fisheries biologists were great fellows, and a lot of them are still around. In 1976, Alberta Environment posted a job for the development of a scientific lake management model. And I looked at it and I thought, oh, that looks super interesting. So I applied for it and was fortunate to get the position. And the task was to work on the development of a watershed lake approach and to develop a lake management model for Alberta. And I'll show you in the slides, there was a lot of stuff going on in Alberta, a lot of conflict in the early 70s. So the government had decided they needed to figure out how do we manage lakes. So it was a great opportunity, and that led into the 80s and the 90s, which I'll speak about. Lots of work on lakes. And towards the end of the 90s, a lot of us biologists in the department, and I'll show you who those people were.
So we just have Dave frozen, but this happens. He's joining us from Mexico, so it just takes a second.
Awkward, but very difficult thing for the or leadership within Alberta Environment to take our information and apply it to any lakes. And I don't say that in a negative way. The department's responsibilities as a regulator were under the Water Act and under APIA, and a lot of the effort of the department was in terms of, under Water Act, taking care of water allocation, the whole business, and particularly in Southern Alberta and the irrigation districts. And under APIA, it was industrial municipal control, point source control, and a lot of that was around the urban areas of Alberta and at the oil sands up north. But there wasn't really much of a priority for lakes, even though by the late 90s we had a ton of information, and there was an awful lot of research at U of A under Ellie Preppis and Dave Schindler. So I think I'll just leave it there. The challenge, I think, remains, and I'm hoping there can be a really good discussion going forward about where do we go for the next 50 years. I believe the last 50 years have an interesting record. The final point I'll make is that everything we did as young biologists in Alberta Environment was deeply embedded in the scientific literature of the world, without doubt. This whole concept of eutrophication and managing phosphorus loads and managing watersheds and managing sewage, this was being nailed all over the world, particularly in Western Europe, and particularly by organizations like the OECD and the United Nations. It was being nailed in all the major journals that we were reading, like Limnology and Oceanography and Freshwater Biology, and so it was very much the accepted way of doing things, and we just basically started applying that to Alberta because it hasn't been done before. So with that little background, I'll try and go through this. This is a complex topic, so I'm going to just try and catch the highlights. So this talk is basically from another talk I gave 10 years ago, which I had to reduce substantially to make it fit into our time slot here. So here we go. Okay. So I do want to acknowledge all of you as volunteers, all the lake associations, stewardship groups, and all the NGOs, ALMS, WPACs, and municipalities. Everybody has done, I believe, their best. There's a tremendous amount of volunteer work going on, and a lot's been accomplished. I also want to acknowledge the staff biologists, and I'll show you some names there. And I did mention the labs of Ellie Preppis and David Schindler, who did wonderful work. Okay. The summary is pretty good work has been done in Alberta to understand the problems facing lakes, but a lack of authority means the Water for Life partners have limited ability to conserve lakes and other interests as well. And so I'm going to propose an idea for discussion that a Crown corporation with authority for lake watershed management and lake conservation could be one solution. A Crown corporation. We have 19 Crown corporations in Alberta, and in Saskatchewan, they have 2 Crown corporations for water. Okay, we'll carry on now and get through it. Give that personal background, we'll go through the history, and then we'll pose a challenge and the proposal. Okay. Where I grew up in Port Hope was on the Ganaraska River, and interestingly, that whole area of southern Ontario was settled right after the American Revolution, and certainly by the first few decades of the 1800s, people were moving in, and then large numbers of people came in around 1840 and 1850 in particular with the Irish potato famine. So you see the cover of a report there. I'll just back up one bit. Yeah. So there was a huge problem with the Ganaraska and Port Hope being down at the mouth of the river. Port Hope started to experience flooding and flooding and flooding. And this started and was being documented from the mid to late 1800s through the early 1900s. When I was born in 1948, I can remember really, really high flows in the river. We got to the point in the 30s that the town leadership were wondering, well, what's causing all the flooding? So there was a watershed study done in the Ganaraska, and it was published in 42 or 43. So they started it in the late 30s. So what they did was basically not too much different from what we're doing now. They did a watershed assessment. They did a mitigation plan. They came up with a budget. And uniquely, they came up with a legislative basis for implementing the watershed plan. So the assessment was, yep, people moved in. This is a very hilly country. It's the Oak Ridges Moraine, which you may have heard, very similar to the landscape of the Carvel Pitta Delta, where Walt and I are working north of Stony Plain. It's a post-glacial hilly country, except these are big drumlins in north of Port Hope. They're really, really big drumlins and very, very thin soils, lots of sand, as you can see. So that's what the landscape kind of looked like after, 75 years of farming and deforestation. Because when the settlers went in, they just cut the trees down, tried to build farms. It turned into a complete disaster. The topsoil was washed away. The flooding ravaged Port Hope. And so that's why the study was done. The solution was to propose a reforestation of the watershed, which they initiated right after World War II. It's now been largely reforested. They put a budget. How are you going to do it? It's all private land, private farms. Well, they bought the farms. The government just bought the farms, including my grandfather's. Then the question came up, well, who's going to take care of it? And that's when the conservation authorities of Ontario were formed in 1948, actually. So a very quick look, if you can see the green spot there in the middle of your screen, that's the Ganaraska Forest. And that's the headwaters. That's very, very high ground. From there, the water flows south to Lake Ontario, and it's a really steep slope, so it really whooshed down. Anyways, that was the first watershed study in Ontario, and I think in Canada. And it's just a coincidence that that's where I grew up. I didn't appreciate it when I was a kid and even when I was a teenager, but as I got into my education and started reflecting on it, I thought, well, that's pretty impressive. So that was World War II. Okay, so back to Alberta now. As we know, we have relatively few high quality lakes, and many of our lakes are shallow and poorly flushed. And we've had a very similar duration of human impact here, because Alberta was opened up in the late 1800s, early 1900s particularly. So I just use a figure about 125 years of human impact. Well, that's all it took in southern Ontario for them to do the damage there. A lot of people had to come out west because they could no longer farm in Ontario or around Port Hope. So a lot of them came out west. We've gone through the same sort of experience here. And so there has been some conflict on our lakes, okay? And just to reflect on what was going on in North America, going back to the 30s and 40s, FDR Roosevelt started the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Depression, largely to employ young men, but their mission was to restore landscapes, and it was a huge thing. I think there was a couple of million young men that were employed. And again, this was during the Depression, so a lot of reforestation. Out west here, we had the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Act, the PFRA, to encourage the restoration and rehabilitation of landscapes that were being withered away by drought and wind, but the same principles of landscape restoration, I would say. The Ganaraska Report, which I've told you about, and then Richard Miller, Dr. R.B. Miller at U of A, started some significant work here in 1949. And I was hoping to have a photograph of his reports, but some of you have seen them. But they were the first biological studies of Alberta lakes and streams, and we refer to them a lot. Okay. So in the 50s and 60s here in Alberta, Martin Pates was the chief fishery biologist, and his staff, they did a lot of work on Alberta lakes and rivers, of course. Martin was the author with Joe Nelson, the book, The Fishes of Alberta. And during the 50s, I think the Geological Survey of Alberta was also taking a look at lakes to try and map out the water chemistry patterns of the surface waters of Alberta. We also had the Canada Land Inventory out here, which I referred to earlier. It's called CLI and Sport Fish Capability Surveys. They were still finishing them up when I got here in 74. Some of the fisheries biologists were still finishing the CLI work up. So it was a good thing across Canada. They not only looked at fish, but they looked at soils. They looked at forests. They looked at all our natural resources. A very broad view of the world. And we had lots of research in the 50s and 60s at U of A and University of Calgary, and lots of eminent professors and researchers in that particular era. Okay. And move forward to the 60s and 70s. Now, this is where eutrophication really started to consume people's interests, and there were a lot of problems in Western Europe for sure. A lot of problems with water supplies and eutrophication after the war. There's and centuries of neglect. So eutrophication in Europe was a huge issue, and so a lot of academics and governments, I guess, to varying degrees, had looked into the issue, and the OECD published a major piece of work in 1968 when it's called the Scientific Principles of Eutrophication, 1968. And we all use that as a pretty good guide. And it was all about what we call the phosphorus modeling sequence, understanding how much phosphorus comes to a watershed, trying to understand those loads, predict the amount that would be in a lake based on the lake's depth and its flushing rate and so on. A huge amount of modeling innovation there. During the 70s, the United Nations put out several manuals under their International Biological Program about freshwater, and so we all had that stuff. The journals I referred to, LNO, Freshwater Biology, JFRB, they were packed, I would say, with stuff related to eutrophication and relevant issues. So we all, as young biologists, we devoured those, and it was really good. And of course, we had the ELA. The leadership in Canada with David Schindler, the Freshwater Institute in Winnipeg, but the experimental lakes area was in northwestern Ontario. So there was tons of stuff going on. We were blessed in a way that we could access this as young people. Okay. So in floating around Edmonton, I'd come across some funny cartoons. This is one from the Edmonton Journal. You may remember the editorial cartoonist for the Edmonton Journal was a guy called Ed Olashuk. Well, in 1970, I can't quite see the date, but I think it's February 13th, which is interesting. That's tomorrow, February 13th, 1970. Ed was commenting on phosphates. And I wonder, well, what would an editorial cartoonist know about phosphates? Or why would he be doing that? Well, it's because it was becoming an issue in 1970, as I've described. Next one, please. And this one here is another one that was done in May of that year. We carry the latest fishing equipment, Geiger counters, mercury content meters, phosphate level indicators, 1970. So Ed was on the ball. The next one is just a little bit of a levity. It's the isn't it great to get away from it all? I think that's what that caption says. But that's in 1970 in the national parks. There was some congestion issues, I guess, and enough that Ed Olszak would pen a cartoon on it. So isn't it great to get away from it all? Yeah. Okay, so a few cartoons there from 1970. So to show you that it was an issue. Alberta Environment was formed in 71. The water resources side came from Alberta Agriculture. The pollution control guys came from Alberta Health. And that's how the department was put together. First minister was a guy called Bill Yurko. Interestingly, there was a big symposium at U of A on the lakes of Western Canada. It was held in the fall of 72 and published in 73. All the researchers across Western Canada came in, and there's a lot of excellent presentations on many aspects of lakes. Okay, so there was a ton of stuff going on before then and being reported at that symposium. There was a lot of problems with lake development in Alberta, so the government created a task force called the Shorelands Task Force, 1974. And I'll show you what they did, but they looked at a large number of lakes and made some recommendations because development and access were becoming huge points of conflict around Alberta lakes in the early 70s. The response from the government was to do a task force, and they came up with regulations in 1976, which I'll explain to you in the next slide. But they basically they prohibited development at 15 Alberta lakes. They prohibited development at 15 Alberta lakes until the municipalities got proper municipal development and subdivision bylaws in place. And at the end of the 70s, the lakes there's still all kinds of conflict, and the government decided that they wanted to develop a scientific base for lake management. So that's where the Baptiste Lake study originated. That's the work that I did. Okay, next slide. There's a symposium on Western Canada. I just wanted to show you the cover of the book. It was a huge symposium, large number of speakers, including some of our colleagues who are still with us. Okay, next. Okay, Bill Yurko gave the welcoming address to that symposium in November. And it's quite interesting if you read it. I think we might all agree that a symposium on the lakes of Western Canada is timely. Here in Alberta, intensifying industrial and agricultural activities have not left our lakes unaffected. Problems such as fluctuating and receding lake levels, 1972, deterioration of water quality, shoreline erosion, silt deposition, and competing usage are increasing in magnitude and scope. These problems have gone on far too long. And I thought that was a pretty good statement, 1970. These problems have gone on far too long and reached proportions which now dictate that a concerted effort by different levels of government is required to preserve the quality and character of our lakes. So, okay, next slide. So Task Force and Shorelands assessed 630 lakes. 45 were identified as being of immediate concern, and development of land for recreational, industrial, residential prohibited until a lake management plan, which is really not what we call a lake management plan now, but a zoning bylaw was prepared by the municipalities. That was the consensus of that task force. I had nothing to do with it, but look at the next slide. So they froze development at 15 lakes, and you can see the lakes that are there. Baptiste, Gull, Garner, Island, Isle, Lac La Biche, Lac Lenon, Lac Saint Anne, Moose, Muriel, Nakaman, Sandy, Skeleton, Sturgeon, Wizard. No development until these municipalities were able to develop the proper bylaws. Regulation was repealed in 1986. So there's a little bit of Alberta history. The Baptiste Lake study, that was one of the ones that triggered it. There was a proposal for a subdivision right in the Narrows there. You can see the peninsula on the right-hand side there. The community blew up because they said the lake is in bad shape. We do not need any more development. So we were assigned the job of figuring out what's going on in the watershed. So we did the first detailed nutrient budget, okay, for Alberta. So we looked at all sources. You've probably seen these images before, but we looked at runoff through forested streams, agricultural streams. We had to estimate what was likely coming in from cottages, but we measured rain and snow, atmospheric deposition. We had an estimate of groundwater input into the lake in terms of the water budget. The one thing we didn't do was look at the internal loading, because at that time, nobody in our area here really understood anything about internal loading, sediment release. But we became aware of that very quickly within a couple of years. So next slide. That was our budget, and that's the type of pie chart we came up with. Internal loading is not shown because we didn't know what it was, but the streams were contributing a lot, and the agricultural streams were contributing a lot more than the forested streams, which was in line with all the world literature, and everybody was finding that, so there was no surprise there. Next slide. So at the end of the day in 70, just back up one. At the end of the day, when I went, I worked on it with Dave Bellovo and Eva Young. We looked at the watershed, and we were asked about the potential impact of the shoreline development, and we had a comment on that. As long as the sewage is managed and the riparian area and shorelines aren't destroyed, it could go ahead. But that was our thought. But in the next breath, we said, but agriculture has doubled or tripled the loading to the lake. And that was not a very palatable message at the time, 1979. And our managers basically said, well, this is Alberta. What do you think we're going to do about agriculture? And that was it. That was the end of the discussion. So that was a bit of a kick in the tummy. So we just left it. Okay, next screen. Just about done now. Through the 80s and 90s, Alberta Environment got its monitoring program started basically in 1980. So we did the Baptiste work. We learned a lot about sampling issues and sampling phosphorus dynamics in streams. And so the lab methods and the field methods were developed. And by 1980, we had started to implement things. And we developed the lakes program through the 80s. Pat Mitchell did a lot of the work. I went to the Cold Lake area and worked on the Cold Lake Beaver Water Management Plan. We worked on 11 lakes up there. Pat worked with the Alberta Park staff and started to do a type of volunteer sampling with the park staff to start to get more information on lakes, because there wasn't any. And it wasn't until 1980 that we really had really good phosphorus analytical methods. And it wasn't until 1980 that we started doing composite sampling. At Baptiste, we realized there was just tremendous patchiness in when the blooms were occurring. So where do you sample a lake? So that's where we got the basis for composite sampling. And we did several surveys of lakes around the province to give us the statistical basis for it. By 1990, Pat and Ellie got on had enough information to create the Atlas of Alberta Lakes, which was really an incredible accomplishment within 10 years. ALMS was formed in 1991, the Alberta Lake Management Society. We were all looking for management, and so that was the notion to start the society. I was on the first board. Academic research at U of A was really, really good. Ellie, I'm going to take my hat off to her. She looked into a lot of detailed stuff in terms of phosphorus cycling in lakes, and she produced a lot of excellent graduate students. And David Schindler arrived in, I think, 93, and same with David, lots of excellent students. Okay, the big thing in the 90s for us was agriculture. So I've alluded to the fact that agriculture was I don't mean this, well, I won't say sacred cow, but I said sacred cow. My family are farmers in Ontario, so I'm understanding the whole thing, and I know it's a delicate topic, but the fact is agriculture has had an impact on surface waters, and up during the CASA study, which was a huge study across Alberta done by Alberta Agriculture and Environment in the 94-97 period. And at the end of it, our agricultural colleagues are all great guys and girls that just, we realized we're having a big impact. David Schindler really approved of our design and our results. So things are going good. And then some stuff started to happen towards the late 90s that were difficult. The first thing that happened was our Water Resources Planning Division was abolished in 1995. So we were in a different branch, and the hydrologists and the biologists and the groundwater guys were in sort of science units, but there was a water resources planning division that was looking at river basin planning. Well, they were abolished in 1995, and that really confused a lot of us. We were wondering, well, what kind of a water management agency can exist without any planning? But that's what happened. And on top of that, there was frequent reorganizations. I won't get into it, but when you see the qualifications of the biologists doing the work and the hydrologists and hydrogeologists, we're all asking ourselves, why are they reorganizing us? Why are they doing this? Well, that's a theme. We'll get off it. Next slide. Okay, so here's a picture of the group, our small group in about the mid-90s. So Doreen LeClaire, Wendell Koning, Al Soziak, Lee Noten, Richard Casey, myself, and in front, Anne-Marie, Bridget Halbig, Pat Mitchell, Karen Saffron. So we were all, I would say, like-minded in terms of trying to advance the information base on lakes. We were all involved in watersheds. I'll show you that in a second. Great people, great to work with. So next slide. So I do want to acknowledge the environment biologists, because some of you may not realize how many were working on lakes over the 3 or 4 decades. So Paul Patko was the first biologist in environment, then Trevor Roundson, Klaus Exner, Hal Hamilton, Shirley Charlton, Patsy Cross, Pat Mitchell, Dr. Stuart Anderson, Anne-Marie Anderson, Lee Noten, Richard Casey. Next slide. Dave Beliveau, Eva Young, Wendell Koning, Karen Saffron, Al Soziak, Darcy McDonald, Rick Nelson, Nadel Drummy, Rod Kaminsky, Dave Spelko, Jay Babin. One more. The younger crowd here, Rod Hayes-Winkle, Randy Shaw, Jackie Shaw, Zero Will, Craig Emerton, Preston McEachran, Alina Olansky, Joanne Little, Chris Tyker, Scott Livingston, Chris Rickard. These were all first-class people, and they dedicated themselves entirely. Okay. So we did 9 watershed studies, 8 while I was still with the department. The Pigeon Lake was done in 2013, but these were massive amounts of work. You kind of alluded to what had happened at Baptiste, but the same thing was done at Wadman. They were multi-year projects, usually a couple of years, and a large number of people involved in sampling the lake and in sampling the streams and analyzing the data. These were huge efforts in terms of human resources. So I'm just going to flip through some pie charts here. So just go to the next slide. And that's basically the diagram of what we looked at. What comes in from shoreline sewage, urban runoff through subdivisions, atmosphere, forest, agricultural land, internal loads. Those are the main sources that we identified and had been identified by everybody else. So Wadman, Pat did this one, 81 to 82. It was the first complete budget where we had an estimate of internal loading, so in the purple. Just keep your eye on the light purple as we go through these pie charts. So that's significant. The internal loading was massive. Tucker Lake up at in the Coal Lake area in 1982. Same thing, very undeveloped watershed. Pine Lake, look at the purple again. Internal loading huge. Next, this is Lesser Slave Lake, which is a huge lake. That internal loading was huge. Lac St. Anne. Okay, again, huge. They're all running around 50, 60%. And next, I think there's one more. And one more. That's Pigeon Lake there. So I just wanted to show you that the amount of work that had gone on by the staff biologists and the typical cycle for phosphorus in many of our shallow lakes is this example from Tucker Lake up at near Bonnyville. And things really take off after the midsummer minimum in mid-June as the water warms up, and a lot of change in the internal phosphorus cycling, and the internal loading becomes the dominant feature. And that's the pattern you see in most lakes. And in your lake, a lot of your programs, you maybe start sampling in June and finishing in September, you'll see the upslope. But that's what this thing looks like overall. The deep lakes have a different pattern, but those are just details. Okay, next one. And there's some intact sediment cores from Pine Lake, and that's the source of a lot of your phosphorus. Once the phosphorus is, the problem with their lakes, because they're not, once the phosphorus is loaded into the lakes, it stays in the lake. Very little gets out. And over the 125 years of settlement in Alberta, a lot of our recreational lakes have been loaded up. And that's a huge topic, but we'll leave that one for today. Okay. And the phosphorus modeling sequence. If you know the loadings, you can predict the concentration in the lake. If you know the concentration in the lake, you can predict the amount of algae. Well, we don't have to predict anymore. We know they're all related, but that was the phosphorus modeling sequence that was advocated during the 60s and 70s and 80s, in which we used in many of our reports. Okay. And the final slide, around 2002, I was really hammering on the lake eutrophication thing, trying to get a management framework, trying to convince the powers that be in the government that we needed to do something, because the other big issue of the 1990s was acid rain, and we had a very good understanding of the effects. There was treaties between the U.S. and Canada. There was a Western Canada program between the federal government and BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Northwest Territories, Yukon. We mapped the whole of Western Canada with respect to its sensitivity for acid rain, and then we determined what would be the allowable deposition rates and put a management framework in place. Yes, we had the same kind of knowledge for eutrophication, no management framework. Climate change and effects on lakes, no management framework. So that's where it ends, okay? Okay, so here's the challenge. And this will take about another 5 or 6 minutes, and I'll be quiet. In my opinion, well, not my opinion, factually, central Alberta rivers have improved since the 70s and 80s because of applied research and strong pollution control regulations. And when I got here in 74, very few people were playing around on the North Saskatchewan River. I used to go out and fish it at night. I'd be the only one down there. The sentiment in Edmonton was the river was grossly polluted. I used to fish under the high-level bridge. I'd be the only one down there. But the engineers, the industrial engineers, the municipal engineers in our department, to their credit, they worked diligently during the late 60s, 70s, and early 80s to restrict industrial discharges and restrict municipal discharges. Calgary was the first city in Canada to put in phosphorus reduction, and that led the way for Edmonton and Red Deer and Lethbridge and so on. And so phosphorus discharges from wastewater treatment plants were much reduced during the 80s. There's a whole story about that. So rivers, we know, have improved, but lake water quality has not improved. Lake water quality, in my opinion, remains poor or threatened in many cases, even though we got all this research. So the challenge is accountabilities for lake management need to be resolved. Alberta Environment has not, with respect, did not take up lake management as a priority. And I believe local watershed management plans have to be integrated with current land use planning. In other words, the province and the municipalities have no option but to be working together. So we'll go through this now. So that's a challenge. To firm it up, the last 5 contributions I would encourage you to look at. You may already know about Jerry Hakel's something called The Law and the Lake. He presented it at an ALMS conference in 2001, published it in 2002. But it summarizes the myriad of of provincial and municipal legislations that apply to lakes, and it's very complicated. You all know that. It's very, very complicated, but it's called the law on the lake, and Jerry was picked how the status quo is. Water for Life came in 2003 and set up the WPACs and the watershed stewardship groups to be involved in the watershed process. I'll comment on that in a minute. But more interestingly, in the last 10 years, Water Conversations 2014, Environment canvassed a lot of people around the province about how things are going at their lakes, and there's a lot of concerns expressed about burnout and lack of clarity as to who is in charge. And that was published by Alberta Environment as a consultation thing called the Water Conversations. That directly went to the Alberta Water Council, and they were assigned the task of coming up with recommendations to improve lake management, which they did in 2017. And I'm in support most of those, all of those. Last fall, the Auditor General did a review of the Water Act, and it was a bit critical of Alberta Environment in terms of its progress on water management planning. That's a big topic. Last month, Jason Unger gave a really good talk on water management planning and alluded to watershed planning. So there's a number of things that have happened in the last 10 years that point to the fact that we need to identify an authority or some, let's say, leadership to take on this task of lake management. And again, I before I go into these recommendations, I just want to acknowledge all the work that everybody's done in stewardship groups and at ALMS and at NGOs and in the department. There's been a ton of effort on all fronts, but I think we need to look ahead 50 years. What we've done the last 50 years is, it's good. Lots of scientific information in the first 25 years, last 25 years, lots of public involvement under Water for Life. But I sense there's some frustration. There's a demographic factor here too. I believe a lot of the volunteers are older, and I'm not entirely sure if the younger generation is going to be able to provide that same volunteer effort that a lot of you people have provided. I hope I'm wrong on that, but I think the demographic reality is there. I think a lot of people, our generation, I'm speaking of the baby boomers now, we were fortunate and got through the work world, and those of us that are in the retirement world are fortunate. A lot of young people are struggling. We know that. So I think, based on all of the above, but including the demographics, what can we do that will provide a better crack for the next 50 years to guide and protect these lakes? Okay. So first consideration, a comprehensive evaluation of the future roles of the government of Alberta, municipalities, and NGOs in the management of lakes and their watershed is required. First consideration. Next. Alberta watershed stewardship groups and WPACs are heavily invested in the Water for Life process, but do not have the legal authority to manage lakes or their watersheds. Okay. ALMS, the Alberta Lake Management Society, is heavily invested in lake monitoring and research, but does not have the legal authority to manage lakes or their watersheds. Next. A thought would be to get the Provincial Auditor General could be requested to assess the ongoing issues concerning lake and watershed management in Alberta. Next. The Environmental Law Centre and the Alberta Law Reform Institute could be approached for advice on this issue, and I know there's interest. Go. 6, a comprehensive evaluation of Alberta's provincial lake-based economy is required to focus attention on the importance of managing our lakes and their watersheds. So this is a thing that I raised 30 years ago. We got to look at the economic importance of lakes, and it's been done in various ways. but I think it needs to be done holistically. And there's some information on this, but the economy associated with our lake experience. So whether you're a resident, whether you're a cottager, whether you're a renter, whether you're a camper, whether you're a fisherman, whether you're a you're a boater, the amount of money that is spent on the lake experience is enormous. And I think if the politicians had a better grasp of how significant that is, depending how you measure it, they might be more inclined to consider the bigger question of who's in charge. Okay, next. And again, on that point, political level engagement is required to increase the awareness of elected officials about lake management issues. This is a political question. With respect, this is not a bureaucratic or administrative question. This is a political question. Our elected officials must be informed about this independently. The future roles of the Crown Water Manager, that's Alberta Environment, the Crown Water Manager. Land managers, that's municipalities and the GOA in the Green Zone. The future roles of the water managers, the land managers, and NGOs in lake and watershed management must be fully integrated. Okay. I advocate for targeted, coordinated, and holistic watershed restoration projects for prioritized lakes, reforestation, riparian restoration, wetland restoration. A lot of that is underway through the efforts of many of the existing lake stewardship groups. But in my opinion, we need to repair lake watersheds to the degree that it's possible. I know it's an extremely complicated task, but I think that is the future, is to restore watersheds. Okay. And last one, the emerging effects of climate change and population growth in Alberta bring urgency to the evaluation. We have a lot more people coming into the province, and a lot more people want to have the lake experience. And we're seeing the pressures from population growth in many ways in our province, not the least of which is going to be on your recreational lakes. Okay, next. So that's a proposal. And my proposal is a Crown Corporation with full authority over lake and lake watershed management in Alberta is proposed. And this is just my own idea. Why a Crown Corporation? Because a Crown Corporation can operate outside of government departments. I came up with a lake. You could have any number of names, but for instance, the Alberta Lakes Conservation Authority. It could be something else. It could be anything. But a Crown Corporation could be, there's 19 Crown Corporations in the province. So, and as I said, there's 2 water Crown Corporations in Saskatchewan. So it's a huge topic. And my idea would be that all the players would be working under the Crown Corporation or coordinated by the Crown Corporation. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened inside Alberta Environment. And I say that with great respect. I'm grateful for the opportunity I had, but it's not happening. And it hasn't happened over the last 50 years. So what can we do looking forward 50 years to give our lakes the proper management they require, and what could be the vehicle for that? Okay, thank you. And if you want to correspond, I'm happy to talk about this with any of you at any point going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I offer a virtual applause. That is a ton of information. And perhaps unfairly, I tasked Dave with thinking about this problem and coming up with an idea for the future. Because I feel that for many of us who are working within the system right now, it's very hard to find the time to do that kind of thinking. A lot of us are more focused on the day-to-day or ensuring that work continues to be supported uh, currently and maybe just into the next year. We're so bogged down with the day to day, it's hard to take a step back and think about where are we going. So I know you had probably tossed and turned about this over the past couple of weeks, and I appreciate all the effort you put into the presentation. A couple things that stand out to me are in the 70s and 80s when you talk about the government purchasing agricultural land to restore watersheds or prohibiting development around lakes until proper management or planning was in place. Like, it's fascinating to hear that these activities were occurring 50 years ago, but today I think those ideas sound rather progressive. And so I think it's important to reflect on how far we've come. Um, and I also want to give Walt Nielsen a chance to jump in here because I know Walt works on the issue of lake management with the Mayatin Lake Management Association. And so we'll let Dave catch his breath. Walt, if you want to just add your 2 cents to the issue.
Sure, Brad. First of all, I'd like to say Mayatan Lake is just west of Edmonton, for those of you who don't know. But Dave is a member of our association, and we're extremely lucky to have him as a member of our association. He has helped us out in many, many ways in his previous role as head of the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance. He developed a state of the watershed report and a watershed management plan for our little lake, one of the first, if not the first, plans of its type in the province. And over the last 5 years or so, we've been working with Dave, as he mentioned, on the lakes in the Carvel Pitted Delta area, which are west of Stony Plain, where there's nearly 100 lakes out there. I would also like to put a plug in here. Uh, Most of all of those activities were supported by grants from the Land Stewardship Center. And for those of you who may not have gotten the message, the Land Stewardship Center is dissolving, is the term they're using, and the future of watershed stewardship grants is very much up in the air. So if you are of a mind to do so, I would encourage you to write a letter to the Minister of Environment to say that this is a very important program and that it should continue into the future. So back to the topic at hand here, we are very supportive of the need for better clarity, better rule on roles and responsibilities, and clarity on the systems and processes for managing lakes in Alberta. And Dave is going to present these ideas at our board meeting in just a couple of weeks. Of course, as he mentioned, it's not just the province that has a role here. There's a lot of different players. The province and the municipalities need to work together on solving these things. So we are talking to the province. We're also going to make a presentation to Parkland County on April 21st to first, it's a new council there, so it's a bit of an introductory thing, but also to put some of these ideas on the table and to make sure that the things that we're doing around, lake surveying and eDNA and so on are going to be helpful to them as they make their plans going forward. So I agree with pretty much everything that Dave has had in his presentation, and we can see out here that lakes are under stress for lots of different reasons, including climate change and nutrient loading and so on. So to have a good system in place and real clear responsibilities and roles and responsibilities on how those lakes are managed is, in my opinion, extremely important.
Thanks, Walt. I think with that, we can open it up to any questions or comments from folks on the webinar. We've got some clapping. Thanks. It is a impressive feat to put that presentation together with all that history. Are there any questions? Maybe use the raise your hand button if you do want to comment or reflect on the presentation. I don't see any comments in the chat. Okay. While people are thinking about possible questions, oh, there's some coming in now in the chat, so I can read those out to you, Dave. Is there a working model for this type of body? So I think, is there an existing example that we could base this idea off of? I think is the question from Stan.
Yes, the existing model in Canada is the Ontario Conservation Authorities, which are local authorities which have oversight on the management of their local watersheds. They work with the province, they work with the municipalities, but they're independent authorities vested by statute. So there is models in Canada that have attempted to do this.
Thanks, Dave.
Actually, I should say that I suspect the conundrum, the dilemma that I outlined, it probably exists in many provinces. I think it does. I think Ontario having a conservation authority is unique.
Thanks. There's a comment from Michael that says, are folks here aware of the new Alberta EcoTrust initiative, the Alberta Coalition for Watershed Security? This could be a good forum to advocate for a Crown Corporation approach or other high-level management requests. Dave, are you familiar with that new initiative?
No, I'm not, and thanks for bringing it up. That sounds encouraging. Again, I've been out of the mainstream for about 7 or 8 years now, so I'm reflecting on everything that I was aware of up to 2018. So I'm glad to hear that there's an initiative being considered. Great, wonderful.
Great. Are there any other comments? If not, I will pull together some breakout rooms here, and I'll just share my screen actually to get back to the breakout discussion. Okay, just give me one sec. Okay, so there are some discussion questions on your screen here, and I'll split us into 3 rooms. It'll be myself, Brittany, and Kirsten who will help lead those discussions. But mostly it's a chance also for us to get to know each other and introduce yourselves and understand what the issues are at each of your lakes of interest. You know what's so funny is I said we'll go into breakout rooms and I can see everyone's running away. No one wants to go into a breakout room. But the keeners will stick around, I'm sure. So let me just, there's Kirsten. Okay. Let me just quickly assign everybody. Okay, and 2. And room 3. And we'll just have a few minutes in these rooms, so I will call us all back shortly. Okay, I'm going to open those rooms up. Okay, everyone should be able to join a room now. Let's see. Okay, there's Brittany.
We were having a very good discussion on how to get more people involved in lakes. So,
Oh, great. Um, I'll just let the other room rejoin us. There's Kirsten. Okay, great. Okay, let's see, 5, 10, 15, 17. Okay, I think we got most people back for just the closing here. Our room was discussing how to work better with municipalities. We were discussing whether or not there's actually political buy-in for this issue. We discussed the Alberta Water Council. We discussed some of the models out in BC and Ontario. Was there anything, Brittany or Kirsten, that you wanted to mention that was a different topic of discussion in your rooms?
Go ahead, Brittany.
thank you. I think, yeah, one of our discussion points was kind of the challenges with succession planning and talking about how a lot of our volunteers, even specifically at ALMS and part of these watershed groups, are the older generation, and how do we get younger people involved and how do we get the youth interested? And Bonnie actually brought up a good point, and hopefully they are able to do this, but getting out into schools and kind of start presenting to kids, maybe try to get them outside, get them interested, get them involved from a young age might help with some of that succession planning.
Cool. Yeah, great. And Kirsten, was there anything else?
Yeah, we kind of started talking a lot about our frustrations in terms of the advocacy and seeing that within politicians, like that's going nowhere. Those concerns are getting elevated and then nothing's happening or anything like that. And so one of the big things that we had talked about was how can we get everyone together, kind of forming a coalition, that it's not just individual watershed groups or WPACs or anything like that individually talking to politicians. It's a big group saying, hey, like, listen to us, and kind of how that could look and what we could do to get everyone together going forward.
Great. Thanks, guys. So we've run out of time for today's session, but I'll just give a shout out to the next webinars that are scheduled. So March 5th, there's another one, which will be featuring PLWA Pigeon Lake Watershed Association, Wizard Lake Watershed, and Wabamun Watershed. So that'll be March 5th. And then on March 26th, I still haven't fleshed out the agenda for that day, but I'm hoping to have a focus on the topic of in-lake treatment, which is always of interest in Alberta, and hoping to shed some light on that issue. So thank you, everyone. Specifically, thank you, Dave and Walt, for all of the background work that went into making today's webinar possible. Dave just has a wealth of knowledge on this issue that I think we can all learn from. And actually, Dave and I have discussed maybe I should be doing some like archiving some oral history of all of this, so that we don't lose all this great work that's been done by scientists who have came before us. So yeah, with that, I hope to see all of you on March 5th. And yeah, thanks for your participation today. I will go ahead and stop the recording.
And Brad,